It was late on a snowy night in the small town of Crossnore, North Carolina. Thomas sat by the gate watching over the farm in the freezing cold. Merely looking out to the Appalachians that bordered the small town gave Thomas a sense of unrelenting dread. Suddenly hearing the sound of the sheep bleating out, disturbing the silence of the night, Thomas loaded his rifle and ran to check. His heart raced as he neared the sheepcote. Horrified to see a wolf had broken in. The sheer size of the deadly animal frightened him to his core. As he held his rifle ready to shoot. But before he could do anything, the wolf bit onto its prey and ran off into the woods. It took 3 sheep and you couldn't do anything. Believe me, sir, I saw it with my own eyes. It was a huge wolf. You saw it and you didn't do anything. This is the 3rd time this month. It's been attacking all our animals. Last month I lost 2 of my cows. This has been going on for long enough. We have to do something. I know what we have to do. If we can get rid of them, we'll scare the rest away. How? We'll send 5 of our best hunters to take down as many wolves as possible. Theodore Smith. He knows these valleys and mountains better than anyone in this town. But do you think he will help us? He stopped hunting ever since he got married. We'll have to go and see. Sometime late in the afternoon, a group of men from town visited Theodore Smith at his barn. Theodore, we need your help. With what? Theodore said as he stared out into the mountain ranges. You know what has been going on. These wolves have become a nuisance. Every month they're causing us enough loss. Even last month, it attacked 2 of my cows, and this month many of our sheep. Theodore, no one knows these valleys better than you. We've decided to send 5 of our best hunters into the South Valley to hunt as many of these wolves as possible. Theodore silently listened to the men. You rich men, don't you have enough animals? So what if the wolves take 1 or 2 every month? You want to kill them and extinct them from nature? You're saying this? You're the one who killed the great wolf. Yes, and I don't do that anymore. Theodore, our hunters are not going to kill them. They're only going to scare them away from this territory. Ever since you got married, you stopped hunting. And we know that you're going through an economic crisis. You don't have children, but you have a wife. If something happens to you, what is going to happen to her? Help us, and you won't be disappointed doing business with us. But Theodore did not reply, nor even look at them. All right, if you're going to protect these wolves, know that we'll go on our own. With that, the men got up to leave. But just then, Theodore called them. All right, you men don't know these valleys and what is in them. I don't want you to get lost and lose your lives. Prepare your 5 best men. I'll take them. We'll set off on the 28th. Bring back the wolf skins. We'll make good profit from them, and if he creates any trouble, get rid of him. So on the 28th of the month, 5 men along with Theodore took their horses, some supplies for the journey, and set off towards the Appalachians sometime in the afternoon. It had snowed all night, and the grounds were covered a feet deep. After 4 hours traveling, they reached the riverside. It's getting dark. Let's set up our camp here and get some rest. Jacob, you see if you can get some hunt for tonight. Frederick, put on the tents. George, collect water and I'll get the fire started. Theodore tied his horse and sat down as the men all got to work. About an hour later, Jacob returned with a deer, and the men skinned the animal and had it roasted. They say he got that scar while fighting the great wolf. With him, we'll definitely be able to hunt these down. That night, the snow began to fall again, and the winds started to pick up. The men gathered around the fire and offered Theodore dinner. Is it true you killed the great wolf with only your hunting knife? The great wolf is immortal. No one can kill him. But we've heard stories you hunted the great wolf. You brought back its skin and took the reward and got married. If I hunted it, then I guess it was not the great wolf. After dinner, the men all went off to their tents. The weather was tremendously cold, but they managed to fall asleep. But sometime into the night, they woke up frightened and anxious, hearing sounds around them. They hurried out and scanned the area. Theodore stood outside in the cold, staring out into the hills above the valley. There was a chance we might get attacked. Let's take turns guarding the night. The wolves will not come to this area. We'll get them in the valley upstream. Rest well and be prepared for tomorrow. So the men all returned to their tents. But little did they get any sleep that night. The next morning, they wrapped up all their supplies and followed Theodore. It was evening by the time they reached the South Valley. The snow was heavy, and the winds were becoming stronger. Theodore got off his horse and ushered them. Get off and check your positions. The men all grabbed their rifles and got off, walking around, scanning the area. But it was silent. All of a sudden, all the horses began neighing aggressively before they galloped off, startled. The men looked around, suddenly horrified by what they saw. Up in the hills that stretched beyond the valley, they saw not one or two, but many wolves staring directly their way. So many wolves? You didn't tell us there would be so many. You said you wanted to hunt the wolves. Stupid old man. Don't you realize if we don't survive, you won't survive? The wolves all began to descend. The men turned and loaded their rifles, ready to shoot. But when they pressed the trigger, nothing happened. What's going on? They're not working. Don't just stand there, help us! But a strange smile appeared on Theodore's face as he stood firm and the wolves passed by him towards them. About 25 years ago, when settlers had arrived from England and began colonizing the land, they were distraught by the many wolf attacks in the area. So they sought help from the natives to rid the wolves. These animals have not only been attacking our people, but your people, and if you help us rid them, we'll compensate you generously. We do not want your paper money and coins. These lands belong to these wolves, it's their home. If you want to live here, then you must learn to live with them, not take their lives. Captain, wolves are sacred to these people. I hear there's a big white wolf in these mountains. They call it the spirit of the earth. If we can manage to take it down, they'll become skeptic of their faith, then they might help us rid the wolves. Good. Send word around town. Whoever can bring this wolf will get 3,000 shillings. Theodore Smith was one of the settlers in Crossnore. He was the son of a blacksmith, but he was in love with Victoria, a beautiful young woman and daughter of a wealthy businessman in town. Theodore, my father is getting me married. What? Your father can't do this. We love each other. Do something, Theodore. I can't marry anyone else. Theodore was distressed even thinking about losing Victoria. He had to do something. And it was then that he heard of the offer to bring back the great wolf in return for 3,000 shillings. Being the son of a blacksmith, if he could bring back the wolf and claim the prize, he would get honor and prestige and money. And Victoria's father wouldn't object to their marriage. So Theodore started to prepare. He took a rifle and a hunting knife and went out into the Appalachians, tracking down the wolves. For days he searched the valleys. Nights he stayed awake in its pursuit. And soon he found many wolves. But they were not the great wolf. But it was finally after a week, one evening while he was in the South Valley, the great wolf came to him. Theodore immediately shot the wolf. But bullets were not enough to take it down. But he did not turn on his heel. Theodore took out his hunting knife and faced the animal. He had gotten severely injured, but he was determined to take the wolf back. He skinned the animal and headed on his way to town. But in a horrible condition, he barely managed to reach the riverside where he collapsed. Theodore woke up in a teepee. He was wrapped in bandages. There were herbs smoking around him. An elderly native man sat beside him, stirring some tea. "Where am I?" "You're very fortunate I found you. You were unconscious by the river. What happened to you? Some wolf attack?" "Not just any wolf. The great wolf." Theodore took out the wolfskin from his bag and showed the man. But upon seeing it, A look of dread came upon his face. The great wolf never harms anyone. What have you done? You have brought the curse upon you. The great wolf is immortal. But I killed it. The one who kills the great wolf becomes the great wolf. The elderly man nursed Theodore back to health, and about a week later, he returned to town with the wolf. Presenting the wolf's skin, he claimed his prize, and then married Victoria. But something was not right with him. Theodore had horrible dreams every night, and on the night of the full moon, he woke up to severe pain in his body, in his jaws. He felt like his skin was tearing apart. Theodore ran out to his porch as he felt his body begin to change. Theodore, what is happening to you? Great wolf. From then on every full moon, Theodore went out to suffice his newly acquired hunger, preying on the cattle in town. And years later, when the townsmen came to him to eradicate the wolves, he could not let that happen, as he was the leader of the wolves. Last night, it was him who jammed their rifles before he brought them to the valley. And now, they could all live in peace.
Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.
Your package, miss. Could you please keep it inside? Sure. Mommy, I'm hungry. Dinner is almost ready, sweetheart. Thank you, Mommy. It's been 7 years since Elizabeth has been living like this, far from town and far from her family. Sometimes she thinks about home. Sometimes she wonders if they think about her. Elizabeth grew up in the small town of Wells in Alaska with her single father. He was a hunter and quite well known in town. He had been hunting for years, and had a collection of prized game animals, from moose, wolves, and bears. Growing up, Elizabeth had learned all the secrets of the trade from her father. And like him, she was exceptionally skilled in the field. Elizabeth, always remember the 4 golden rules. Treat all guns as if they're loaded. Keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction. Keep your finger off the target until ready to shoot. And always know your target and what is beyond it. Got it, Dad. Great job. She's so beautiful. Roger, one of our men went out hunting on the north side a couple nights ago. It was a full moon. He hadn't returned and we sent some men out to search. His body was found this morning. How did it happen? It was another one of those attacks. You have to do something, Roger, or we'll all be victims. Elizabeth would always accompany her father on these hunting trips, and it was often she would hear about these wolf attacks in these forests. Though Elizabeth thought she could handle it out in the wilderness, her father wouldn't allow her out alone for that very reason. Nonetheless, Elizabeth wasn't afraid of anything. She always carried her gun, her hunting knife, and besides, she didn't go too far out from camp. But every day wasn't the same. And on one specific afternoon, Elizabeth had wandered out a bit too far, and before she could figure her way back home, the sky started to get dark. Shoot, Dad is going to be pissed. As Elizabeth tried to figure her location, she suddenly started to hear low footsteps. Immediately alert, she took out her gun and turned around, spotting a wolf. Elizabeth stood firm, hoping she would scare off the animal. But that's when she realized it wasn't just one, but many, all surrounding her. For the first time, she felt panicked. She didn't know what to do. She might be able to shoot one, but all the others would charge at her. Frantically, Elizabeth put her finger to the trigger. But deep down inside, she was frozen. The wolves howled as they stepped closer to her. When all of a sudden, Elizabeth heard a deep voice. Heel. At once, the wolves stood back as a man ushered them away just with his glance. He looked at Elizabeth sternly. Do not come to this area again. Wait, who are you? And tell your people to stay out. So, you're the wolf man. I'm not the wolf man. That day, Elizabeth returned to camp late in the evening. And sure enough, her father had already sent out a group of men in search for her. Where were you? I got a little lost. I told you not to go far. You know what's been happening. It's dangerous out there. I know, Dad. But I'm back safe and sound, right? Elizabeth didn't tell her dad what happened. But she couldn't forget it either. Who was that man? And how did he communicate with those wolves like that? The more Elizabeth thought about what happened, the more she wanted to meet him again, know about him. But even after searching for the next few days, she couldn't find him. Alright, if I can't find him, maybe I can bait him to find me. I told you not to come here. What's the problem? Seems like your wolves are fond of me. Leave. It's not safe for you. Please, not you too. I'm Elizabeth. I know who you are, and I know your father wouldn't like you being out here. It's not like he's going to find out. What are you doing here? Why are you asking me? I want to know what you are doing here. How do you get along with these wolves like this? Wolves. They're my friends. They're your friends? More like family. Over the next days, Elizabeth returned to the forest, where she secretly started to spy on him. Hi. So, this is where you live? You don't know you're not supposed to go to strangers' homes? Well, if you tell me your name, we wouldn't be strangers now, would we? It's Caleb. It's all right. Tell me why you're really here. I'm just curious. I want to know how you're so friendly with all these animals. So you're a hunter who wants to make friendship with animals. You know, I found your cave like a week back. I could have told Dad about you guys. They've been looking for the Wolfman. I told you, I'm not the Wolfman. Then what are you? I'm the Great Wolf. Over the days, Elizabeth started meeting Caleb more often, and soon they became close. Though Caleb was quite reclusive, Elizabeth got to know more about him and the wolves. There was a time when there were many animals all over North America, wolves being among them. The Appalachians were their home. But when people began ruining their habitat and hunting them down, the wolves slowly began to migrate here to Alaska. But still, people haven't spared them, and now the wolves were going extinct. The days were going by like this. Elizabeth would spend hours out in the forest with Caleb. And with time, the two started to develop feelings for each other. I got you something. A blade? It's not just any blade, okay? It's made of obsidian. I made it myself. Elizabeth, your people will never accept us. They'll never understand our relationship. Perhaps, but I can't imagine being without you. Well, you'll have to, because I won't be here tomorrow. Where do you go every month? There are some things I have to take care of. What is she doing here? Who is he? Roger, we've been keeping watch on the north side for some time now, and we tracked down his home, and tomorrow's the night of the full moon. Good. Bring him back alive. The following night, Elizabeth was at the camp in her cabin. When she woke up hearing a commotion outside, peering through her window, she saw her father's men had brought in a catch. We caught him. We caught the great wolf alive. Didn't even have to use our silver bullets. We ambushed his cave. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to catch him, let alone find him. Elizabeth watched as her father stepped out to see the matter. As the men moved aside, she looked closely at the creature. Half man, half wolf. She froze, suddenly recognizing the locket around his neck. Caleb? What do you want us to do with him? Finish him off tomorrow morning. Seeing Caleb trapped in the cage, Elizabeth's heart raced. What was she going to do? If she didn't get him out of here tonight, she would lose him forever. So she waited. She watched as everyone returned to their tents before she sneaked into her father's room and got out the key. Late into the night, the men guarding the cage had all fallen asleep, and Elizabeth slowly creeped behind the cage. As soon as she got to the gate, Caleb stirred up in rage, not recognizing her. Shh, it's me, Caleb. Don't worry, I'll get you out of here. Elizabeth slowly opened the lock and let Caleb out. But just as they were to escape, Elizabeth froze, hearing a voice. She turned to see her father run towards them, holding up his rifle at Caleb. Elizabeth, get away from it! All of a sudden, all the men picked up their rifles at Caleb, as Elizabeth stepped in front of him. No, Dad, please. He won't harm you. He won't harm anyone. I lost your mother to beasts like him. I'm not going to lose you. Dad, no, listen to me. As the men tried getting closer, Elizabeth tried to shield Caleb. But he became aggressive. And in the moment, Roger fired. No! Elizabeth fell to the ground beside Calum as he took his last breath. Dad, why? Why? He didn't do anything to you. He's not what you think. How could you be so cruel? Get him out of here. Elizabeth tried to fend off the men from Calum, but her father grabbed hold of her and locked her in the cabin. Elizabeth cried as she watched them take Calum away. She pleaded to her father, but he wouldn't listen. It was too late. It's finally over. The beast is dead. Now we won't have to suffer anymore. As news of Calum's death got around, everyone rejoiced, thinking they had gotten rid of the great wolf. But as Elizabeth mourned the loss of her love, she kept hidden a secret. She was pregnant with Calum's child. She knew if her father found out, he would take this life, just as he had taken Calum away from her, but she wouldn't let that happen. So one night, Elizabeth ran away. She traveled far out here, where she started living a life by herself, and soon gave birth to her son. Conan was different. He was no ordinary child. He possessed unnatural strength. He had excessive thirst and hunger. As a child, Elizabeth managed to suffice his needs. But as Conan grew into his toddler years, he required more, and Elizabeth didn't have a choice but to find other means. They want us to deliver this to this house? She began to order horse meat and had it delivered to her home every month on the full moon for Conan. And this was how they had been living for the past 7 years. The older Conan became, the more he reminded her of his father. Why am I different, Mommy? You're not different, sweetheart. You're just like him. One day, you'll become the great wolf. Even if the world were against him, Elizabeth would protect him for as long as she lived. Officer? May I come in? Sure, is everything all right? We've recently gotten some complaints from a delivery service. It was a strange house. When I went inside, I felt like there was a tiger in there. I heard noises, growls. You wouldn't happen to have a pet tiger, would you? Tiger? No, officer. It's just my son and I. Conan. Hello, officer.
Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting. You know I don't like it when you have to go on these trips. Kara, the company is sending me on an urgent task. Well then, how long are you going to be gone? It's only a week's visit. I'll be back before you know it. And this is a good opportunity for me, Kara. Try to understand. Edward was a pharmaceutical scientist. He worked at a pharmaceutical company in Long Beach, California. Edward's boss had chosen him and a few other colleagues for a project in Alaska. It would be a week-long stay at a facility there. When Edward told his girlfriend, Caroline, about the trip, she was disappointed. She never liked it when Edward had to go out of town for work, and this time he was going all the way to Alaska. Caroline was an editor at a newspaper corporation. Edward and Caroline had been together for nearly 5 years. They supported each other for their goals and ambitions in life, but living in the busy city of Long Beach and working full-time jobs made life a little overwhelming. Edward was chosen along with 3 other colleagues, James, Colton, and Elizabeth. They were to leave California on Monday morning and return on the following Saturday. The 4 boarded their flight, and after a long 12-hour journey, they landed in Sitka, Alaska. The weather was brutal here year-round. It wasn't surprising that it was snowing quite heavily. Edward took in an icy cool breeze as he went out the airport door. His phone lit up with a call. It was Caroline. "I was getting worried. When did you get off the flight? I told you to call me as soon as you get there, Ed." "I got caught up at the airport. I met this pretty young woman. She was quite interesting." "A pretty woman? Why would a pretty woman take interest in you?" "Kara, are you sure a pretty woman won't take interest in me or do anything with me?" Okay, you win, Ed." Edward and his colleagues went straight to the facility. They were surprised to see a crowd blocking off the street. The people were yelling, and some of them even had picket signs and shivered in the cold. Suddenly, a man came out of the building and rushed towards Edward. "Welcome. I'm the medical advisor at the facility." Yes, I've recognized you very well, Mr. Ludwig. I'm very fond of your work." Edward shook hands with the advisor. Just then, he heard a woman shouting nearby. She stared directly into Edward's eyes. "You will suffer the consequences. This is our land. This is the sacred ground of our ancestors. The wrath will fall on you. You'll be cursed, you selfish people. Your company's experiments are ruining the environment. Seize what you're doing before danger befalls all of us." The advisor nervously exchanged a glance with the colleagues. "I think we should go inside." When everyone had safely entered the facility, the advisor invited them into his office. "Mr. Ludwig, what are these people protesting about?" "Oh, don't exhaust your mind on these people. We've been trying to build a better future for them, but they're still bent on their superstitions. They believe in the folk tales their forefathers passed on to them. The recent experiments we've been performing in the old laboratory require more space and better equipment. We informed the authorities, who granted us access to a piece of land not too far from here, to construct a new testing facility. The rally started since then, because that piece of land happens to be a sacred sanctuary to the natives here. It's been so many years, but these natives are still stuck in the past." After a tour around the facility, the colleagues came to know the company had arranged for their stay. They had a private lodge for special guests about 30 minutes away. At around 7, the 4 colleagues were dropped off at the lodge. The temperature had dropped significantly, and the roads had snow piled into small mounds every block down. The lodge was located in a rather isolated area. A 30-minute drive back in Long Beach meant you weren't getting too far, but out here in the wilderness of Alaska, 30 minutes driving meant you covered a long distance. There was no way to return to the facility without a car. The view was amazing. There were breathtaking, snow-topped mountains in sight. Edward got out of the car and called Caroline. "What took you so long to answer?" "I dozed off. Couldn't get enough sleep without you last night. I saw a dream." "What's that?" "I saw that you were back, and you took me to the jewelry store and bought me a diamond ring." "Seriously, Kara? I didn't want to tell you, but I saw the same dream. We were together. But do you know who else was there?" "Who?" "Your dad. He was paying the bill." "You always need to have the last laugh, don't you, Ed? I was really missing you. I can't wait till you'll be back." When Edward reached the guest house, he was a bit disappointed to see an old-fashioned cabin. He expected better arrangements. The cabin had been vacant for a long time now, and the caretaker had recently had it cleaned out and prepared for their arrival. "Do you live nearby? Is there any way we can contact you while you're away?" The caretaker handed Edward a card. "This is the number to the facility. If you need anything, give them a call." The caretaker looked out at the scenic mountain ranges. "I should be heading home. This looks like the start of a horrible blizzard. I've been hearing the mountains whispering all day. The people here say it's a sign something terrible will happen." Yes, sure. The weather should be getting better by morning, right?" "Let's hope so. Thank you for all the preparations. See you tomorrow." Although the cabin did not look so great from the outside, when Edward stepped inside, he felt cozy and warm. There was a fireplace. The caretaker had prepared some food. Elizabeth was the lucky one. Being the only female, she occupied one of the rooms all to herself. Edward and his 2 male colleagues were sharing the other room. The colleagues freshened up and sat by the fire at night. They enjoyed a warm cup of cocoa together. They hoped the weather would clear up by morning, but things weren't looking so great. Soon, everyone was asleep, snug in their blankets. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, everyone woke up startled. They heard a noise. It sounded like rolling thunder. Within minutes, the whole cabin took a vigorous shake and the lights went out. Everyone became nervous. Elizabeth rushed to check the windows. Edward ran to the door. "We're covered!" Elizabeth shouted. As soon as Edward opened the door, snow rushed down on him, and an icy howling breeze entered the cabin. There was an avalanche. "Are we trapped here? I don't think we can go out like this." "The power is out. Call the facility and inform them immediately." Edward picked up his phone, but unfortunately, there was no network. None of the colleagues had any signal. When a few hours went by and Edward hadn't been able to call the facility for help, everyone began to get worried. "We need to stay calm. With the food and water we have, we'll easily go by 3 or 4 days. The facility knows we're here. They'll send for us soon." The first night went by without a struggle. The next morning, Edward and his colleagues tried to shovel a path through the snow, but they couldn't make it too far. The fierce winds of the blizzard made it impossible to stay out. They had no choice but to return to the cabin. They managed to get the fireplace going and rationed their supplies amongst each other. On the second day, James caught a high fever and couldn't get out of bed. When help hadn't come, the colleagues began to panic. By the 4th day, supplies were at its end. The dry logs that the caretaker had gathered for the fire were nearly used up. The colleagues were falling ill. The temperature continued to drop rapidly. James went into hypothermia. The colleagues offered him their blankets and huddled around him to heat his body. But all efforts were in vain. Without food, bringing up James's body temperature would be difficult. The 4 struggled to sleep that night. But as the night went by, exhaustion got the best of them, and they drowsed off. Edward woke up to a panicked shout. James had passed away. Edward, Colton, and Elizabeth all mourned his death, but at the same time, they feared they would meet the same fate. Later that day, they took the decision to give James a decent burial out in the snow. Edward began to lose hope. Elizabeth was grieved, and Colton looked devastated. The blizzard was at its peak. The 3 gathered all the blankets, bedsheets, pillows, and everything that they had to keep themselves warm, but it was little help. 7 days had gone by since they had been trapped in the cabin. Edward, Colton, and Elizabeth managed to melt the snow for water, but they had nothing to eat for the last 3 days. They all sat together in despair. The next day went by in misery. The three were suffering from extreme starvation. Elizabeth was bound to her bed. She had hit her breaking point. She knew she wouldn't make it. That night, Elizabeth passed away. We have to do something. We won't make it in this cold. There's nothing we can do but wait, Colton. Colton kept silent for a while. He then spoke out in a low voice. Have you heard the legend of the Wendigo? The natives of this land fear them greatly. It was a creature that lurked these woods. Its body was skeletal and deformed. It had a lipless mouth and jagged teeth. Its steps left footprints full of blood, and their breath sounded like a strange hiss. If you ever had the misfortune of spotting one, you would never forget its glowing eyes, long fangs, and its atrocious long tongue. The creature survived in these cold regions. They feasted on men, anyone who ventured into their territory. The natives say, when the Wendigo is out to hunt, they bring about strong blizzards. They wander the land, eternally seeking to fulfill their ferocious appetite. We're stranded in the bitter snow of the North Woods. There's no telling how long we'll be trapped. There's no other way to survive out here. Then, Edward tried to console Colton. Colton, I know it's been difficult, but bear with me. We can't lose our sanity. Colton murmured, I can't take this hunger anymore. I have to. In the coldness and darkness of the night, Colton and Edward miserably shivered in their cold blankets. Edward was having difficulty speaking. His lips were frozen. His tears formed into ice on his cheeks. He had lost all hope of rescue. Do you think help will come? You're making a mistake, Edward. You won't survive like this. Look around you. We came here as four, and now there's just me and you. There's a reason the natives speak of the Wendigo. It's because the Wendigo stalks these same grounds. Days, weeks, months out here in the coldest of winters. There's no other way. How long can a being resist the desire to survive? Edward ran his nails along the wall. He crossed out yet another day he and Colton had been trapped in this brutal condition. The only good news was that the blizzard had finally ended. Perhaps they could attempt to make their way out of here. As the two discussed what they should do, suddenly they heard a noise. Edward and Colton lit up in joy. They ran out to see a rescue squad in the distance. They anxiously jumped and waved their hands. After a day's rest in Sitka, Edward and Colton returned to California. Caroline was desperate to meet Edward when he got off his flight. The minute she caught a glimpse of him, she knew he was unwell. He had become thin and emaciated. After a thorough checkup at the hospital, Edward returned to the comfort of his apartment after a long time. Caroline was terrified when she heard what happened, but she was relieved that Edward was with her again. The two went to bed that night. Caroline finally got some peace of mind now that Edward was beside her. She went to sleep content. In the middle of the night, however, Edward woke up. He held his stomach. The hunger was unbearable. Hunger was eating him inside out. He went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. Caroline had prepared food for him. He took out his favorite dish and popped it into the microwave. But when he sat down on the table, he wasn't able to eat. It felt as if he tasted something odd. The smell was unappetizing. He took out all the other cooked food, but he was unable to gulp down a single bite. Edward peered into the refrigerator once again. His eyes caught something wrapped in a parcel. Meat. raw meat. Edward suddenly felt an intense craving. Edward stared at the empty parcel. He had gotten a little relief, but he was not content. He still felt the urge to eat more. What was going on? Edward couldn't understand what was happening to him. As he stood there bewildered, he recalled those horrible days in Alaska. There's a reason the natives speak of the Wendigo. It's because the Wendigo stalks these same grounds, days, weeks, months out here in the coldest of winters. There's no other way. How long can a being resist the desire to survive? They say the Wendigo is possessed. It becomes plagued with an insatiable hunger. They continue to hunt until they take down those who they once loved. But no matter how much they eat, they still remain hungry. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.